Hello again, everybody. Welcome back. Today I'm with my friend Drew Tavares.
What's up?
Hey, Drew has been a friend of mine for a while. He actually used to work with me at GameStop way back in the Dizzy.
Yep.
It was pretty cool. Like he was an employee of mine after he was a customer. And that transition was interesting. And after you were an employee, he started coming to one of our small groups where we just hung out and talked about life. And now he's a grown-ass man, graduating college and going out in the real world.
Yep.
But I invited Drew to speak with me today on the topic of toxic Christianity and spiritual trauma, because much like many Christians, he grew up in a Christian household, and he didn't truly own his Christianity or his relationship with Jesus. Instead, he owned different religious views that were espoused and that were modeled for him that may or may not have been quite as healthy as they could be. So we're just kind of dive into that today. And if you guys relate to this at all, share it with somebody else that might be going through the same situation, because that's the whole point of Drew talking today. So Drew, thanks for hanging out, man. I think it's really cool that you're willing to talk about this.
Definitely, yeah. Like I said, earlier, I really appreciate you hitting me up, because I haven't had too many people to talk about with these kind of things, especially in person.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to get all this stuff off my chest is definitely going to be a healthy experience.
Yeah. So I want to pull from your Facebook post that you made. Because I think when people make declarations in public, and I'm not talking about virtue signaling, I'm talking about real, authentic, here's what I'm going through, here's what I'm thinking, without trying to change people's minds. It's just so healthy and so respectable,
Mm-hmm.
So in your first paragraph, you said, "From the moment I was born, I was conditioned to believe in God. I grew up attending church every week, and whether it was a Sunday service, youth group during the week, or other activities, I was always at the church. It's all I ever knew. At an early age, I learned a lot about Jesus, the gospel, who God was, and the importance of being a Christian. I even memorized a lengthy list of verses and could recite them in an instant. Before my dad abandoned my family, I looked up to him. He constantly studied the Bible and told me the importance of specific verses. What I didn't realize was, as a child, his true intentions for learning Scripture. Instead of reading the Bible to grow in his faith, he used it to argue with Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Catholics, and followers of every other religion. He even twisted Scripture to excuse possible narcissistic ways. This was my first exposure to spiritual drama." So with that said, this talk isn't about throwing Drew's dad under the bus at all, because at the end of the day, we're all just chasing after Jesus, and Jesus is chasing after us, and we do it in unhealthy ways, even me and Drew. So this is not about painting his dad in a bad light. So if you're receiving it that way, that's not the intention. But I kind of want to talk about Christianity for you as a kid. So you were in this message, you talked about being exposed to this culture where people were telling you, here's the gospel, here's what you need to know, here's what you need to do, and here's who Jesus is. What was that like for you? What were you actually receiving back then?
Yeah, so I don't remember a lot of my childhood. A lot of it's just a huge blur now. But yeah, in my post, I remember going to church every single week, going to all the activities, Bible studies, youth group, whatever it may be. Like I said, that was just all I knew.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up. And I just basically from the moment I could comprehend things, that's all I learned about was the Bible and all of my daily life. And my mom was definitely really helpful with a lot of things that she taught me. My dad didn't really teach me as much. It was more what I took away from church and what I learned from my mom and stuff. But yeah, I honestly, as a kid, I even though I was learning all these things, I didn't really truly understand them for a long while.
You just saw that this was stuff that you were supposed to learn, just like in school.
Yeah, exactly.
It's math class, it's social studies, it's Jesus class.
Yeah, and I didn't hate going to church every week or anything like that. I mean, like, I honestly, like, enjoyed it a lot of the times. But yeah, like, I like, just didn't really understand what I was doing. Even though I was being told why, I just didn't fully grasp it. Because I don't think I was really taught, like, why I was being taught these things. And I mean, I guess that's, like, something that's pretty common with, like, people who, like, grow up in a church and everything like that. But yeah, that was pretty much my experience as a child. And like later on, when I was like a teenager, that's kind of like when I fully started to grasp like what the gospel was. My old youth pastor, he started like meeting with me, and this was like after my dad had just left. And one day he just like randomly asked me like, "What's the gospel?" And I was like, I literally, I think I said, like, the Bible.
That's so weird because as Christians, you know, there's so much stuff that we're exposed to and force-fed and so many, like, traditions that we believe. When you get down to the bedrock of what's the main message, we have such a difficult, well, we can often have such a difficult time communicating that in a way that's clarified and believable even for us.
Definitely. And, like, I feel like because I grew up in this like Christian environment and it's all I ever knew since like, you know, I was born basically, all of those like basics that you learn about like the gospel and things like that, you kind of forget them in a way because it's become like second nature, and like you really you lose sight of like why you were taught these things. And so I think that was like really a part of the reason why I didn't know what to say when he asked me that. So we like ended up going through this book. I can't remember the author off the top of my head, but it was called What is the Gospel? And after going through that, like really truly understood it, like from like a completely different perspective. And I was like, wow, like I grew up with this, but I didn't actually know this.
So what was the different perspective?
Yeah, like, I mean, like just learning, like, you know, like, cause I thought, you know, like, oh, well, the gospel is just like part of the Bible, right? But like learning, oh, okay, the gospel is, you know, Jesus dying on the cross for everyone, for all of our sins. And like taking a deep dive into that was just a really, it was like a learning process, like all over again, because I was like, oh, well, I was taught these things, but I guess like I just wasn't taught to that depth, and I just never fully grasped it as a kid. And I feel like a lot of people probably don't when they're a kid. They probably just hear like, oh yeah, like Jesus died for us. But like when you're a kid, a lot of the times, I mean, depending on what your like life situation is like, you may not like fully like understand what death is like too. And I think that's like a really huge thing.
Yeah, like I remember hearing about that when I was a kid, and I didn't grow up as a Christian. I grew up in a household that was mostly agnostic Christian. It's like, it's there, it's on the periphery, but we don't actually participate. And I remember thinking, okay, so this guy died for my sins and whatever, you know, the whole Christian spiel. And also Easter egg bunnies, or, you know what I'm saying, like the little, or the peeps, whatever, in pastel colors, and, you know, wearing stuffy clothes. It's all lumped in together. And so it kind of cheapens the whole process of somebody being crucified. At least that's what it was for me. Yeah, so you were, you talked to your, what was he, your youth pastor, you said?
Yeah.
You talked to your youth pastor, went through this book, gave you a fresh perspective on it. Did you start seeing any differences between that perspective and what was being exemplified in your home?
I guess so. Like from that point on, like I guess like the relationship that I had with my mom changed a lot. It definitely changed a lot with my dad. But learning, like I guess like the conversations that I had with my mom were a lot deeper, and like I kind of like understood why she taught me all these things as I grew up. Especially because like usually, you know, when you're a teenager, you start going through like a lot of changes in your life, which I know is like a stereotypical thing to say, but you're growing into adulthood, and you experience like a lot of different things, and so kind of learning the reason why you grew up with this worldview, and like how that's applied as you get older, was definitely like a huge aspect of like that time period of my life. And so yeah, like definitely like it my perspective changed a lot like within my home after I kind of like really understood what I was being taught this whole time.
So let's back up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about in your post, you talked about your dad,
Yeah.
And how he was very studious when it came to Christian literature and the Bible and all that. But you said he used to argue with Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Catholics, and followers of every other religion, and he used it for narcissistic ways. Can you kind of paint a picture for what that's like? Because I do, growing up the way that I did, I grew up in the South, and I grew up in a community where everybody was a Christian. And it's almost like if you weren't a Christian, you're almost shamed for it. And people would use scriptures to make you feel bad or like keep people in line.
Yeah.
And it like the idea that Christianity or a relationship with Jesus is a relationship, that didn't really occur to me until I was in my 30s. You know, it always just felt like rules. It felt like tucking in my shirt. It felt like, well, I can't look at pornography because the Bible says I can't. Not, here's the other healthy reasons in relationship with Jesus why it hurts me to do so. But can you paint a picture for what that was like as far as like your perspective on your dad?
Yeah, so I did not grow up in the South.
Where'd you guys grow up?
So I grew up in Cali and then in Idaho. So, you know, like there's not a lot of religion out in like California and stuff like that. It's no secret there. But yeah, like even though like I grew up in church and everything, like I don't know, I distinctly remember like in Idaho there's like a lot of Mormons there because it's like right next to Utah, and that's kind of like the Mormon capital. So yeah, like there's tons of Mormons, tons of Jehovah's Witnesses, and you know, just like the stereotypical guys in suits walking up to doors and just like knocking on there and being like, have you heard about the Book of Mormon and things like that. But my dad like spent so much time just arguing with them and kind of like telling them why they're wrong. Essentially like saying like looking down on their perspective and on their religion with without like good intentions. It was more of like to make himself like feel better, I guess you could say, or just like feel like that he's right and that they're wrong, like a very argumentative perspective, and not one where it's like, oh well, you're trying to tell them why you believe in Jesus rather than why you believe in Mormonism or whatever religion they may follow. And so yeah, I was exposed to that at like a very early age, and I'd say like everyone in my household was like kind of influenced by that. Like, you know, my mom, like she definitely kind of took on that like judgmental kind of outlook. That's like the word I'm looking for. It is more of like a judgmental kind of argument. And so yeah, like even though I didn't grow up in the South, I kind of had that similar experience where like people would kind of look down on you if you didn't believe in Jesus, but we grew up around a lot of other religions, and so it was more like my household was the one, the perpetrator, like kind of doing that.
So when all this was transpiring, this is a two-part question, and you saw your dad talking with these people, one, how did it make you feel? Like what was the tangible feeling in the household? And two, how did you know what his motive was?
Yeah, so as a kid, I kind of just like went with it. I was like, oh well,
like, get him, Dad.
Yeah, like no, yeah, like I just thought that was normal. I thought that's like how you were supposed to approach those kind of things. And so for like the longest time, you know, I like even myself, like I would kind of have that judgmental kind of outlook on things, and like there's plenty of arguments where I got in with people who weren't Christians, and I'd have like similar kind of arguments and stuff just because I like was surrounded by that so much, and I didn't really know what to make of it like as a kid. And it wasn't until like much later on in my life where I kind of realized like, oh, like this isn't healthy like at all. Like especially as I got older and like really started studying the Bible, just kind of seeing like, you know, how Jesus would go and surround himself with tons of sinners and tons of people who aren't Christians, and even though they, you know, like some of them like just like they all like outright hated God, like he still was patient with them. He like talked with them. He was like there for them. And like there's so many other examples in the Bible of, you know, people like disciples and stuff like that.
And how old were you as you started reading this? And
definitely like in my teenage years.
Okay.
Yeah. So that, like this was much like later on. This was like after my dad had already like left and everything.
And how old were you when that happened?
I think I was like 12 or 13.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So after the fact, you started. Now, was it intentional that you started reading the Bible, or were you just exposed to a community where people were going through it? Like, what was that process?
Yeah. So, I mean, like when I was a kid, I always kind of read the Bible, but I didn't like know how to study it. It was more just like all right, let's check it off of the like to-do list kind of thing.
And you go to church. I know how to recite my verses.
No, yeah, exactly. That's what it was like for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, like definitely whenever we moved to North Carolina, which was a few years like before then, I think I was around 10 or so, we started going to a church that was like deeply rooted in Reformed theology and like very much like taking deep dives into scripture, and from there that's when I started learning how to like study the Bible. And that's when I started understanding a lot more of what I grew up with, all these like verses that I went through and everything.
And real quick, because some of the people that are going to be watching don't know who Jesus is. Some of them might hate Christianity as a religion because of people hurt. Other people might be Christians struggling with the same thing. So when you say you learn to study the Bible, if I hear that through the lens of what I grew up with Christianity, I think, okay, well, I just need to, you know, it's almost like a compulsion to be up to snuff as a Christian. Like I need to be able to recite these verses and know where it says this, because, you know, God forbid the enemy tempts me or you know, tries to distract me. So when you say study the Bible, what does that actually mean to you?
Yeah. So like what I mean by like studying the Bible is I learned how to analyze it. That's like the best way I can put it, is like, what does this verse actually mean? Because there's a lot of verses in the Bible that literally make no sense. Like, and I think, you know, there's some verses that we may not even fully understand as Christians. And so like, yeah, it's just really like taking a deep like look into what you're reading. And like, this is something I learned to do in just any form of reading, or like, especially with art. I feel like spirituality and art has like a lot in common. And so yeah, like I just like started learning how to really like analyze and see like, what am I actually reading? Like, why am I reading this? What can I take away from it? That's a really big thing, like with studying the Bible, is all right, how can I apply this to my own life?
That's a huge one. And you guys, like when we had the small group here at the house, that's one of the main things that I was trying to help people understand, because one thing that clicked for me kind of in the same way is that studying the Bible isn't just being able to memorize verses, but taking something that Jesus said and did, or taking perspectives that people had and figuring out, okay, if this is healthy, why is it healthy? And if it's healthy, how do I apply it in my relationships? Not just, okay, this is stored up here for when I jump into my Christian shoes in my Christian environments. It's like the everyday, because the Bible says that we're not of the world, but we're in the world. So it's like, how do we bring the kingdom? You know? And so for me, the idea of studying the Bible is, okay, Jesus's character is all throughout. The whole point of the Bible is to teach us about who God is. And that way I can understand the relationship, kind of like with my wife. When I talk to her brother, I'm getting little tidbits of her character based on how she grew up and things she likes, things she doesn't like. That's what the Bible is too.
Yeah.
And carrying that with us and saying, okay, well, how do I use this to sanctify things in my life or love other people well?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just so cool that you started to see that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I especially at kind of, I'd say an early age, I feel like a lot of people don't really learn that. I have a lot of friends who are Christians who grew up in Christian households as well, and they didn't really learn to start doing that until much later on in their life. So yeah, at a very early age, I was learning to do that right away. And so yeah, I started like going to youth group by that point when I was a teenager, and we would have like Bible studies and stuff like that, and just pick a chapter or verse, or maybe we'd have like a theme of something that we'd go through, and just really studying the Bible. And we'd have like essentially like I don't remember what we called it, but some sort of like quiet time where we'd split off into groups, and we'd talk about, okay, well, what does this verse mean, or like things like that. So yeah, I kind of like learned about that pretty early on.
Yeah. Going back to your post, you said, at some point, I truly understood the gospel and became a Christian. While I was growing spiritually in some ways, I was deteriorating in others. A large portion of the members held legalistic views towards art. And you're talking about your Reformed Calvinistic theology that you grew up in. Certain genres of music were bad. It was wrong to watch Harry Potter. Playing video games was worthless, amongst many other things. Because I was an avid gamer, we're both gamers, hence why we worked at GameStop, and we love like Halo and League of Legends and stuff.
Yeah.
I was tossed to the side and became an outsider. My young mind was led to believe these infectious lies, and I quickly fell for their legalistic and judgment ways. I distinctly remember the countless times people would pridefully gloat about how our church is the only church worth going in the area, and we're the only church that actually preaches the word. Eventually, there was a massive church split, and I grew tired of seeing myself become not only like them, but as my father as well. This was the second exposure that I had to spiritual trauma. So let's talk about that for a second, because that's a lot of that's a primary characteristic of your life, because you just graduated with your associates in art, right? And Drew is going into film, which is really awesome. He produces music, loves drawing. We were just talking about that, but gamers too. So like, I was watching this video the other day about this pastor that was talking about why Pokemon was evil and of the devil.
Yeah, that was definitely another one of those things that's on that list for me. Yeah.
Yeah. So talk about that, because you had this proclivity towards media and a way of life that you just enjoyed, right? Now, some of that's unhealthy. Like some people have a proclivity towards bars and drinking, and if you take that super far, it can be really bad. Just like, I mean, the type of people that we would see come into GameStop, a lot of them would just waste their lives spending 90% of their paycheck on a collector's edition of a video game.
Yeah.
So it can be bad too. But like, how did you reconcile that in your home and in your life, thinking, okay, well, I think I want to pursue Jesus and it seems healthy, but there's this wall of awful that I have to get through to get there, where everybody in my life is telling me that a large portion of what I'm into is sinful?
Yeah, it was tough for me because I grew up like playing games. I always had like some health issues and stuff like that, so I was never physically active as a kid. And I did play sports for a while, but it just eventually got like too much. So gaming is like the thing that I like really did a lot, especially because I found out much later on in my life that I have like ADHD, and so reading for me was like really tough, and like school and all of that. So like gaming was just my thing growing up. And I loved the storytelling specifically.
What kind of games would you play?
Well, Halo is definitely a big one.
Yeah, hence the shirt.
Yep, exactly.
Show it off for a second.
Yeah.
So awesome. I love it.
Yeah, I know. I love how like minimalistic it is.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, it's obviously Halo. Halo fans will recognize it, but kind of has like a little bit of style to it,
Yeah.
But yeah, like I grew up playing Halo, that was probably that is my favorite game series because I grew up with it. And as an adult, I can look back at it and like replay them and see like, wow, these are actually like really good games. It's not just nostalgia. But yeah, like Halo was like a really big part of my life, like a bunch of like Star Wars games and stuff like that. I love sci-fi stuff. That was my genre. And yeah, like I watched a lot of movies growing up too. As a kid, my parents didn't have a lot of money. So I was always kind of like late to everything. I didn't have like all the new consoles when they first came out or things like that. We would rent movies whenever they would go to like Blockbuster and stuff like that. Throwback to that.
Oh man, Friday nights, so good.
Oh yeah. But yeah, I grew up with like a lot of art, and my family was never really artistically inclined. My mom was like really into drawing, so I think that's where I kind of inherited that. But like from I guess like a more intellectual perspective, they weren't really into art that much. But I grew up just loving stories, and that's ultimately why I think I fell in love with gaming so much.
Yeah, and I was kind of the same way. I mean, as I mentioned, my household was agnostically Christian, but my parents never hit me with you don't need to play D&D because it's of the devil, or the whole water boy, it's the devil, you know. Yeah. And so I was able to engage in pretty much anything as long as I didn't get my parents in trouble or whatever. I mean, there were obviously there were guidelines, like you can't watch R-rated movies until you're whatever age. But as far as like the expectation that if I go down this path with my life that it's going to take me away from Jesus, or it's just not something that, you know, just a baseless boundary. I guess that's what I'm trying to communicate. There weren't too many baseless boundaries, or there were boundaries with reason. Because coming into Christianity later in life for me, there's so many things where I'm like, I can just acknowledge, okay, well, why do you believe that? That doesn't make any sense. Like we were just talking about atheism earlier and how atheism doesn't really make sense to me. And that's a big comment to make, right? And if you guys want, I can talk about that another time. But specifically with like gaming and Harry Potter, because you mentioned Harry Potter in here. I love Harry Potter. I also love Lord of the Rings. It's cool to see these stories come alive because there's like this adventurous spirit that we have. Like every time I watch a Gladiator, I'm like, yeah, get him, Russell Crowe, you know, or Braveheart with Mel Gibson. And just part of me comes alive, and it's like, I want to be that protagonist, you know. But if you look in the Old Testament, you know, if you take the word Bible off of these stories and you think about the story of David and Goliath, and you just like see the story of this guy that went before this huge guy that was killing all the other the Israelites, and thinking that this little shepherd boy took him out with a sling. It's like, that's a badass story.
Yeah. And I mean, it's one that's actually used in a lot of art today. Yeah. Like even by people who aren't Christians, they'll use that as like a baseline kind of like structure for their story, like an archetype or whatever. Which like, yeah, like and there's like a lot more stuff like that in the Bible too, where definitely there's stories like that are used to kind of recreate or like make new stories in modern art. Just like an interesting like side fact.
I think it's really cool. So as you were going through all of this and you were leaning into the gaming, and you were, because when you were coming up in gaming, Xbox Live was a huge thing. And now we have Discord, which is how a lot of kids, I want to say 20 and under, develop their social circles, especially in the gaming community. Was it ever discouraged for you?
No, yeah. So we didn't have internet for a long time, just because like money and stuff like that. But whenever we did, I want to say it was like back in like 2010 or so, right around when Halo Reach came out. That's when I first started playing like Xbox Live, and I was never discouraged from playing online. Obviously, like I was told, you know, be careful who you talk to online. Which I definitely think is a good thing for anyone. Highly recommend, you know, having boundaries and like being careful of who you talk to online. But yeah, like I was never like outright discouraged from playing with friends. Obviously, for a while I had like a set time limit of how long I could play, which I don't think was like a bad thing. It wasn't egregious or anything like that. But as I got older, I started like playing a lot more games, especially online with my friends. We would just play all kinds of different games and just goof off and make a bunch of dumb jokes and stuff like that.
What about the content though? Because you like kind of like how things like Pokemon and Harry Potter were had a lot of disdain in the Christian community. Yeah. Were there any things that you wanted to engage in and they were like, it's not so good?
As far as gaming, not so much. Definitely like with Harry Potter, I was told that it was bad, so for a long time I thought it was like dumb and bad. I was like, no.
You thought Harry Potter was dumb?
Yeah, but we were allowed to watch Lord of the Rings. That's the thing. That's the thing that gets me. Is a lot of these people who think that Harry Potter is bad, they're fine with Lord of the Rings and Narnia because those are both like, Christian. And Harry Potter, like even though it kind of like I feel like has a lot of Christian roots in its storytelling, it's like some people are like, oh well, it has witches and stuff like that, so it's witchcraft. But I'm like, there's magic in Narnia and Lord of the Rings too, so I don't really see the disconnect there. But yeah, like I definitely like now, like after watching Harry Potter a few years ago, I wish I would have grown up with it because it's definitely something that I would have loved. And yeah, there was like some other movies or things like that I can't really think of off the top of my head, but there's definitely different types of movies or games or books or whatever it may be that I really wanted to be a part of. All my friends talked about them, but I wasn't allowed to because my parents were influenced by people who said that they were bad.
Yeah, so as you were developing, so far you said that you grew up in this household where this expectation was set for you and this judgmental mindset was just the norm. And as you became an adolescent, your dad kind of pieced out for a bit, and you started really thinking, okay, well, how does Jesus really apply? But then the culture that you were gaining proclivity towards, it seemed like there was a lot of hypocrisy. So what it seems like to me is as you were maturing, you started seeing hypocrisy not only in that area, but also in, how Jesus has been modeled for you. Yeah. And so I guess, and let me know if you disagree with this, but it seems like this is where acknowledgement of spiritual trauma first became apparent to you, right?
Yep, definitely.
Gotcha. So could you talk about the epiphany of hypocrisy and the true application of Jesus and figuring out what that actually is and taking ownership of it? I want to talk about that for a minute because I think that's a big thing for a lot of people, especially if you've been a Christian your entire life. Taking ownership over what you believe and why you believe it is scary because you have to ask those really potentially dangerous questions that a lot of people don't want to address from a pulpit.
So by that point, whenever I started like kind of noticing these things, I mean, like one of the big things also, like you mentioned about how I talked in my post where like gaming was kind of like frowned upon. And it wasn't like as explicit as like people saying like Harry Potter's bad, but like a lot of people were not into gaming, and like it was really hard because like I was starting to like grow up and stuff, and my dad had just left, and I was like really like lonely, I guess, and I didn't have a lot of friends at my church at that time, and this was when I was still going to church every single week, like all the time. I was very involved.
And what kind of church was it, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, it was a Reformed Baptist church.
Reformed Baptist church.
Yeah. And so, I was a huge gamer at this point, and a lot of the people just kind of like weren't into that, and it was really tough for me to like try and talk to people, and like even just from like having simple conversations, like it's just like they didn't really want to like be around me. And so like it got like really frustrating, and that was like one of the things that kind of got me to where I was like, I don't really feel at home here. I don't feel at place here. I feel like an outsider, and I don't want to be here anymore. Because like gaming was such a huge part of my life, and like it helped me, like especially at like some of my darkest moments. Like it was like a nice like escape, I guess. Not that like, I guess escaping from your problems is always the best thing, but it was just like a fun, like neat thing to have like there for me at those times. And so like it was really frustrating because I'm like, you know, at the end of the day, we're all like Christians here, so why does it matter like if I'm a gamer or if you're like super into sports? I'm not super into sports, but I'm still willing to talk to you and like even ask you questions about sports. So it's like, what's wrong with games? Like, come on.
Yeah, well, you're supposed. Corinthians says that you're supposed to put away your childish things, Drew.
I know, right? Yeah. Yeah, I actually have like a funny story about that. This is like kind of like, I guess in the same topic, but kind of like veering off a little bit. So like at one point, like I said, we had this church split, and that's when I first left that church. And I started going to a different church, a really big church, much bigger than the one that we were going to before. And it was a non-denominational church. And I had probably the best Christian experiences, like at that church. I grew a lot. I was a part of like this small group of just guys like my age, and like all from like different kinds of backgrounds. They all had different interests, but like I felt like I was a part of the community, and it was like such a massive church. And so like when you have like a sense of community at like a large church compared to being in a smaller church and not feeling like you're a part of the community, it's such like a refreshing experience, because like that's kind of like weird that like, you know, a much more intimate kind of community wasn't a community at all. Like, so it was a really like great time for me, and so that was like the later years of high school for me. And then we ended up going back to that church as I graduated high school, back to the
what was that
previous
like?
one. It sucked because I had so many great friends at the other church, and I still kept up with them.
What was the point for leaving this awesome experience, awesome church, awesome community, and going back to a crappy place?
So it was basically like I miss some parts of it. Like I miss some of the people, because I did have friends there, and it wasn't like completely bad there, I guess you could say. And like I remember there being like a lot of great sermons from like the main pastor and stuff like that. So like, you know, I didn't like hate it or anything like that. But like a big part of it was because like I wanted to be in the same church with like my family. So like my mom was like kind of floating around like trying to find churches whenever I was going to this other one in between.
And she was a single mom back then, right?
Yeah, and so I was like, I want to, you know, be with my family and like going to the same church and stuff. So that was like kind of part of the reason why we decided to go back.
Yeah, gotcha.
And so yeah, like I ended up going back with them, and then like by this point, that's when like all my friends from the in-between church started, like they all graduated. They started going to colleges like all over the country. And so it was like really hard to like keep in touch with all of them, because they're all like moving on with their life, and I'm kind of like just stuck here.
That's a weird place to be, isn't it?
Oh yeah, like because I wasn't going to school at that time, so I was like kind of just stuck, like left behind basically. And so yeah, like it's definitely like a weird place, like especially when you don't have that many friends anymore. They're all like kind of like leaving.
Yeah, dude, in those formative years, man, like in your early 20s, you're transitioning out of something that was stable and consistent, that had a cadence to life. Like, okay, I'm in 6th grade. Okay, next year I'm going to 7th grade, and then 8th grade, and then it's like receiving keys to your life, and it's like, okay, well, hop in, you know, get driving, but everybody's going in different directions, and everything that was stable prior to that's now loose sand, and it's like, well, what do you do? But you have to choose now. And so like I want to move on to this real quick, because you said you left that church
Yeah.
And then you joined a reform group on Facebook, and you said, through this group, I made a few friends and learned there were other reformed Christians with similar hobbies and interests, particularly gaming and art and stuff.
Yeah.
This led me to a myriad of reformed groups. Although it was merely virtual, I received the fellowship I needed during my search for a new church home. And then you said you started noticing a pattern. You once again were becoming judgmental and legalistic. I constantly engaged in online arguments about theology, and I ultimately ruined friendships along the way. I was influenced by a toxic community who used their immense knowledge of theology as a weapon. This sounds like a theme for what was going on early on in life for you.
Definitely.
These few years were some of the most depressing in my life. By the grace of God, I survived, and God used some amazing friends who encouraged me to keep going, even when they didn't know what I was dealing with. And then you went on to say that people helped you change you as a person, and that was another experience of trauma. So basically, when you were younger, you experienced this standard that was set of being judgmental. And then you started, when your dad left, you started exploring, okay, well, here's what I like in my life, and how does this mesh with Jesus? Who is Jesus? What I actually believe? And so you started going off on your own, and on your own, you found this thing. It's like, okay, this makes sense. I'm figuring this out. This is good. But then you reverted to the judgmental arguing, and which is, something that was ingrained in you. Yeah. So what was that like, acknowledging, wow, I'm doing this again?
Yeah. It was like basically for a few years, like I was kind of like in that really judgmental mindset. Yeah. And it wasn't just like with Christianity either. I got really heavily into politics and got swayed with like a lot of views, and I would get in a lot of political arguments with a lot of my friends and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so it kind of just like rubbed off into every aspect of my life, where like there was just so many things where I was like angry about and I was arguing about, and like I wanted to be like having the superior opinion on things.
What were you angry about exactly?
I don't even know. Like really, like I was just like, I don't know. Like, yeah, like just anything. Like it could be over like the stupidest things. I was just like, no, my opinion's better because I know this truth or whatever.
Why do you think that mattered to you so much?
I think because like I was influenced by a lot of those people who had that same mindset, who did the same kind of things, and like I guess like some of those people were trying to be like mentors to me in a lot of ways. And like kind of like shaping me as a person. So I guess I kind of just inadvertently wanted to be like them. And yeah,
so you were following a model?
Yeah, no, okay. Yeah, exactly. Just kind of like how I have been like my whole life previously. So like yeah, it was just kind of like the same old kind of cycle that I just kept getting back into essentially. And after a few years of that, this was right around the time of like, I don't know, it was like like a year or so after the 2016 election. And like I just like kind of got burnt out on like the whole political space, and I got burnt out on just arguing with people all the time with theology and stuff, and I kind of just like took a step back and realized, wow, like and this was at a time where I was super depressed.
And it was 2016, that was when, were we working together then? What years did we work together? Was that 2019?
2017 to 2019.
Okay, so right after.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, it was like literally right after that, because yeah, right before I started working at GameStop, I was like incredibly depressed. And so like that whole year, like, yeah, I was like going through a whole lot, and I kind of realized, wow, like all this stuff that I was being influenced by kind of like added a lot, or maybe was the biggest proponent to why I was super depressed all the time. And so
just make sure I'm tracking, you had models that were set for you, and people that you aspired to be like, mentors that were teaching you judgmental ways. And the more you fed into that and tried to find, I guess, like satisfaction knowing that what you're doing, what you're thinking, what you're espousing is correct. When you found that you couldn't get people to change their minds, it led to the feeling of depression. And then you started acknowledging this and realizing, wow, I'm just exhausting myself with something that doesn't work.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's exactly what happened. And yeah, like, so that was kind of around the time where, like, I just, started, like, making, like, a lot of changes in my life. And, it took a while. It was a process. It wasn't until 2019 where I really, like, I say, like, that's my, like, growth year or whatever. I really made a lot of changes in my life. But yeah, from that point, that was after, like, I left that one church the second time, and I hadn't been to church at all for, like, years at that point because just of all the past trauma, like the hurt and just the bad experiences, it was really hard for me to want to go back to church and to, like, look for one. So yeah, like, I basically mostly had my, like, Christian fellowship online with people through, like, those groups and stuff like that. But after I kind of decided, you know, I don't want to be like that anymore, I started taking a step back in some of those groups, left some of them. But then I found out that there was a lot of people in those groups that I became friends with who had similar experiences.
And real quick, there's a scripture that I love so much that talks about what you did. And it says that the Lord cuts back branches that don't produce fruit, and he prunes the ones that do.
Yeah.
And that's not something that God just does on his own. It's something that he invites us into. And I think it's so cool when you look back and it's like, that's what I did.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like you were following Jesus because you know in your heart, and you guys too, when you're engaging in something that's not loving. You know how to navigate that and get there from here. It's always, like, tricky, but I just think it's so cool that you started taking those steps because you acknowledged, this isn't how I want to be.
So it was just, like, a huge learning experience for me. And like I said, like, I started meeting other people who had similar experiences, and, like, some of those people are reformed, but they're not like all those other people who are, like, super judgmental or wanting to be theologically superior and things like that. They're, like, some of the most loving people I know. And so, like, it was really awesome, like, starting to meet all these people who were kind of on my same wavelength or had similar like life experiences that I had. And I was like, oh, so I'm not alone in this, because, like, I was feeling really alone in this whole kind of thing. And I, you know, like, at this point, I started having, like, so many, like, comments thrown at me, like, oh, he's not a Christian because he's believing Reformed theology and different things like that. Or, like, oh, it's because he's not going to church, and, you know, just
Man, you're missing those check boxes, Drew.
Yeah, I know. Like,
you gotta check off all the boxes to be a Christian.
Exactly.
You can't have a relationship unless you check off all the boxes.
Yeah.
You gotta be perfect.
Exactly.
You have to be sinless. Fall in line. Follow the tradition.
Yep. Yeah, like, that's the exact kind of thing that, like, I just, like, was surrounded with all the time. But yeah, it was so, like, cathartic meeting these other people. And, like, that's when I really started to, like, realize I went through all of this stuff, and, like, I thought I was alone, but I wasn't. And that's kind of the point where I started to be able to move on, I guess. Because, like, for the longest time, I was, like, kind of holding these grudges or whatever. And I realized, you know, even though I had all these bad experiences, I did learn some good things. And I did have good experiences. But I don't have to, like, hold a grudge towards these people who, like, kind of treated me poorly or things like that. You know? And because, like, the way I look at it, I was just like them, and who knows, they may change one day too. It's like, you know, it's different for everyone. Like, I know some people who had been in similar situations who are much older than me, and it wasn't until they were much older than me when they realized they needed to make a change in their life.
Yeah.
So yeah, like, like, right around that time was just, it was huge for me.
So when you started, when you selected these people or started pursuing these people, and just making sure I heard you correctly, you said that one of the things that acknowledged in your mind, or you just, like, felt was right, was that they weren't trying to prove anything. They were just following Jesus and trying to figure things out in an authentic way where it wasn't judgmental, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. And that's the thing, like in an authentic way, like all of these other like churches I went to that held those like legalistic kind of views, it felt very unauthentic and very like there's like a system in place for these kind of things. And you know, when you study the Bible and like really analyze it, you realize, oh, like your faith isn't these check marks. It's not to be a perfect Christian. Far from that, actually. And at the end of the day, it's a relationship between you and God. And like I felt like at a lot of these churches, a lot of those people didn't like they lost. And I'm not saying they aren't Christian or anything because of the way they view things, but I feel like they lost sight of that aspect of like there's two really big things that are super important in faith. It's recognizing that you like have this relationship with God, and then love. Like that's something that I didn't experience for a long time, was like love within the church. And not just love for other Christians, but love for people who aren't Christians, who don't believe.
So what does that mean to you when you say, because that's one of those terms that could be put on a pillow and thrown on a couch, you know? It's like, well, love people that aren't Christians. So you and I come from a similar gaming pop culture style background. I wasn't a Christian growing up, and you know, the idea of love, like some people say, you know, love wins because there's the LGBT movement, you know, and then, you know, love. A lot of people think that love is codependency, like giving without boundaries. Some people think love is, well, just allowing people to take from you, not loving yourself. Like one of the Christian tropes that I hate so much is that we're supposed to sacrifice everything, give it all away, you know. But the word says that we're supposed to love God with all of our heart, mind, body, and soul, and love others as we love ourselves. So like, what does that mean to you exactly? What does that look like? Because apparently this was a big thing as far as your transition from being judgmental to what you are now.
Actually, it's funny that you mentioned that, because recently I was having a conversation with one of my friends who's not a Christian, and like he's made that clear to me like a million times, but he's like recently like asked me some questions about my faith or whatever. But one thing he asked me about just I think it was last week was like, so him and another one of my friends were talking about love, and so like he just asked me, what do you think love is to you? And so like I explained to him, and it like kind of took me a while.
Corinthians, it's patient, it's kind.
But yeah, like it took me a while to like kind of answer it, because I'm like, that's a really like big question, and it's something that you have to really think about, because there are all of those different views of what love is, and I don't think there's really a concrete like absolute definition of it, because love is a very abstract kind of concept. But like the biggest conclusion I kind of came to is like, love to me is loving people as you would love yourself, and also like having like genuine care for them. Like I don't know, like an example I can use is like when you like have like, let's say like a work friend or something like that, you know, like yeah, you may say you're like friends and you may like hang out every now and then, or you may like talk and stuff like that, but like, do you really like care about them? Like if you were put in a situation where you like had to like put yourself on the line, would you like do that for them? Or like, you know, would you sacrifice time to, you know, be a part of their life? If not, then you probably like, you know, that's not like, you know, love. Love is like much deeper than that. It's more than just that kind of acquaintance kind of thing. And so like with having love for people who aren't Christians, like in 2019, like one of the things I started going through was learning this whole kind of like concept, and like, you know, realizing, okay, like I'm a sinner. I you know, I'm not a perfect person, you know. Like as Christians, we're not meant to be perfect, you know, like we never will be, like until we get to heaven. Like like on earth there is no perfection. And so like I was like so who am I to judge people who, you know, aren't Christians?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm no better than them, and I don't deserve to go to heaven,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but it was a gift that was given to me. And so it's like, you know, I just kind of realized before, with this whole judgmental outlook on everything, I was very judgmental towards people who weren't Christians. And so like one of the biggest communities that you mentioned earlier is the LGBT community, and like a lot of churches are incredibly hateful towards gay people just because, you know, there's a verse here and there that mentions like homosexuality or whatever.
Well, I just on that real quick, I think it's just that subject in particular is so much more difficult to navigate than other things because it's not an item that's tied to the sin, so to speak, like alcoholism or whatever. Like that sin is tied to an inanimate object, but everything within that is tied to a person and another person, or a person and their God-given identity. Yeah. And so it's like, when you address that, especially with like vitriol and hate, and you throw the baby out with the bath, it's like you have to throw it all out, or you have to keep it. It's like there's no middle ground of allowing God to sanctify over a lifetime. It's like either make the decision or stay in that camp, one of the two. And it's threatening to think about that liminal space in between where God actually works on people's hearts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, like one thing like I really noticed, like especially because I started like making a lot of friends who are like who identify like themselves in the LGBT community. I'm like, dang, like some of these people grew up in churches, and you know, like part of the reason why they left, like I'd say the biggest part of the reason why they left is because of that judgment and that hate. And like it just like makes me sad because I'm like, you know, I experienced that too, like as a Christian, and I'm like, I really like empathize with that, and I'm like, you know, we shouldn't be like going out here and hating people because that's not what God holds. That's not what Jesus did in the Bible. And so like I just like never really understood like why people do that if they say they're Christians, because that's not what it says to do in the Bible. And if you can find me the verse, like please show me, because there is no one. But like, you know, I just it was very like eye-opening for me, because I was like, yeah, like especially the LGBT community, I was very like judgmental towards those type of people because a lot of people I grew up around with were very judgmental towards them. And so like processing all of this and learning how to change with all of this was very big for me in 2019 and since. And you know, I've learned to like really, like, I guess the biggest thing is I've learned to empathize with people and like understand like who they are, what their situation is, and be willing to understand it, and be willing to put aside my differences to understand like what you're dealing with, or who you are as a person. And so yeah, like that was just like a big thing that I've like learned over the years.
Well, it's kind of like Jesus with the woman at the well. You know, the woman at the well was not exactly the upstanding citizen that most Christians aspire to gain favor from. And when he went to her, you know, he just approached her like a person. And a man like Jesus back in the day approaching that type of woman was unheard of. And when he was talking to her, he's like, you know, you're working for all this water, but how would you like to drink from a well that never runs dry? You know, come to me and drink, you know. And I just think that's so interesting how he looked past her circumstances and saw her identity first, because you don't change somebody's heart by changing their circumstances. You change their circumstances by changing their heart. And in 1 Corinthians 13, the one part of love that as Christians we have a difficult time stomaching is patience. Well, that and hope. Hope, patience and hope, because it's like if we believe that God is who we espouse him to be, you know, we have to have hope that he's chasing after that person much better than my ability to judge them on a doorstep trying to talk a Mormon down from their faith. You know, so going on to this last paragraph, you said, In 2020, much like the rest of the world, I was forced into isolation. It felt like I was back to square one and I didn't know what to do. All I could do was hope that things would be better. Since then, I've been relearning the fundamentals of faith and continuing to grow in my character. I grew tired of the constant hate I was surrounded with online. I learned the importance of standing against oppression. And then you said, I've questioned my faith many times, wondering if I truly believe, yet I'm constantly brought back to Christ. I may not have the perfect theology, but I know that I'm in a much better place than I was before, and for that I'm thankful. So, as we get kind of to the end of our talk, based on where you've been and the transition from there to here, you know, you're learning how Jesus has applied to your life, and you're focusing on more so you living it out and people seeing you by the fruits of your relationship with Jesus instead of, I need you to change this to prove my point. One, I want to know, why did you choose the word trauma when you were talking about all this? Because you mentioned spiritual trauma, and that kind of made my ears perk up, because I was like, I've never heard Drew speak that way before. Because a little tidbit, when we worked together, Drew had a difficult time looking in people's eyes when he spoke to them, and he was kind of fidgety. So we created a safe word. Right? And that safe word was?
Willem Dafoe.
Willem Dafoe. And so whenever I was watching Drew engage with the customer and I saw him not standing in confidence and actually looking, I would say, hey, don't forget Willem Dafoe. You know, not to call him out in front of, but I was like, come on, you got this. And it's kind of been an inside joke ever since. But yeah, so just thinking about standing in confidence, and also thinking about, okay, I've come from spiritual trauma. Would you talk about that for a second?
Yeah. So, yeah, the whole term spiritual trauma, that wasn't something I really heard of until a few years ago. Mm-hmm. And actually, I can't remember the name of the podcast off the top of my head, but some people who were in one of those reform groups that I was in, they have a podcast, and it's all about spiritual trauma. Mm-hmm. And all those kind of different backgrounds within churches that they've had, or people that they've talked to have had. Mm-hmm. And kind of just learning to navigate through that. And yeah, so I didn't really know about that term until a few years ago, when I started meeting people, and then also learning about this podcast, and kind of seeing that, other people have gone through this similar kind of thing, or sometimes even worse. And at the end of the day, it is kind of traumatic, because it makes you not want to be a Christian anymore sometimes. It's mm-hmm. Well, if this is what Christianity is supposed to be, I don't want a part of it.
Yeah, so basically trauma at its root is where you have a history of experiences that lead you to have a visceral or emotional reaction when exposed to that again. So basically I guess what you're saying is, based on all the things that you've been exposed to throughout your life, when you're hit with it now, it's like, oh gosh, I need to figure this out and deal with this, because this area where I want to go that I know is healthy has been tainted by something else that's artificial and not mm-hmm. right.
Yep.
So how are you able to stand in confidence and say, because we talked about doubt also, how are you able to Willem Dafoe it and say, you know what, I'm going to be a Christian even though there's all this stuff that are in this culture that I don't really agree with and mm-hmm. I don't think are loving?
Yeah, well, so I guess the past year or so, that's kind of something that I've been learning, mm-hmm. is how to have that confidence and how to overcome those things, and how to, keep that relationship with Christ, with God, strong, even when you have those doubts. Like I said before, the whole thing where I noticed a lot of Christians hating the LGBT community, or something I learned about over the past year is there's this really big church out in the West Coast, and they have a huge history of sexual abuse and domestic abuse within their church, and kind of just seeing how a lot of Christians just kind of blindly follow these church leaders without kind of questioning things. So one of the big things is I think kind of like asking questions to God, you know, like why are people, you know, like just so hateful and like not representing like the fruits of the Spirit, like these and like these loving qualities that we're like kind of called to have, and like, you know, like keeping myself in check, and then also like wondering like, all right, do I actually like believe in this? Those are like all the kind of questions that I've had, which have kind of like, I feel like have reinforced my faith in a lot of ways, because like I don't think we're supposed to stay stagnant, and we're not supposed to, you know, feel comfortable with where we're at in our faith. And it can go for a lot of things in life too, outside of just our faith. You know, we should always be wanting to grow more and to be like, to grow our character, to grow our faith, to try and become a better person than where we're at right now. And so, yeah, like learning to kind of figure out like all these different things, like, I don't know, yeah, just seeing all of that kind of hate, like one thing I'm very careful with now is like the people I surround myself with, like especially growing up in all those legalistic households and stuff. And, you know, I won't like cut people out because they are like
all
that.
The toxic people out of your life.
Yeah, like I tried that before, doesn't really work because there's always going to be toxic people.
Well, it's so dehumanizing too, because instead of seeing that person as a person, it's like, this person is toxic. No, that person is just struggling with something, or they're not loving other people or themselves. Yeah, it's something that I struggled with because I was influenced by those people, and I was like that before too. So I don't hold hate. I don't like judge those people anymore, because that's a big thing. It's like, oh well, like for a while, you know, I was judging those people that I used to be like, so I was still like a little bit judgmental when I was going through this like process and everything. So yeah, like empathy is like one of the big things like that I learned about, like with you know, like this whole like spiritual trauma thing. It's like, okay, well, don't cut these people out, you know, like understand their situation, and, you know, maybe tell them why you don't agree with what they think. And you don't have to look down on their opinion. You can just, you know, simply say, hey, this is what I think about it, and just leave it at that. And if they don't agree, you know, they don't agree. You don't have to try and win over their opinion. Yeah, if somebody wants ketchup, they'll pick up ketchup. You know, it's I like Inside Out. You know what movie I'm talking about? If you guys have seen it, at the end, it's so cool. The character Joy in the movie, she thinks that she has the ability to solve everything just by getting people to fall in line with what she thinks is the right way. Yeah. And there's this other character, Sadness, which is a complete foil of Joy. Sadness and Joy. And Joy won't let Sadness do anything. As a matter of fact, there's a part in the story where she draws a circle and says, Joy, I want you to stand right here. This is what I want you to do. And she's like, okay. But at the end, there's a situation where somebody's really hurting and they're really experiencing something bad. And Joy can't fix the problem. But oddly, Sadness goes over and sits by this person that's struggling and doesn't try and convince them otherwise. They just share in the pain that they're experiencing, and they say, I'm sorry that you're feeling that way. And they just sit in it for a minute. And it's really cool as Christians, because we get to do that knowing that there's hope, knowing that there is somebody who loves us, that regardless of what we're going through, God doesn't pluck us out of our circumstances, but he loves us through it. And every single testimony that I've ever heard where somebody has a legitimate, authentic, true come to Jesus moment, it's been in that moment where somebody doesn't force a faith on them, but they introduce them to somebody who's going to love them perfectly. And it's just so magical, man. Yeah. And it's out of it's beyond our pay grade to be able to convince somebody through judgment, condemnation, or threat that they need to change their heart.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Yeah, like that's something that I really have like tried to work on and stuff like that, is like, you know, like the way I look at it, it's like if somebody was forcing opinions on me, I would be like, yo, screw off. Like, I don't want to hear that. So it's like, I totally understand why like people don't want to like do anything with Christianity, like don't want to hear anything about it because they've experienced those kind of people who just force it on them instead of like actually like coming from a loving place and being like, hey, this is what I believe and you should too.
Yeah. Or else I'm going to feel shaky in my faith if I can't have you convinced that what I believe is true. And, you know, that's another thing in Christian religion that I think is so weird, that the religious side of it, we try to get salvations and we try to get all these people, what's your church attendance like? And if we just get enough people to follow what we believe, maybe we won't have doubt. But doubt is required in order to have the necessity for faith. If there is no doubt, there's no necessity for faith.
Yeah.
You know, and every relationship is like that. So just be careful of that. But closing this out, I'm curious because, you know, you came from a background of judgmental Christianity, of argumentative Christianity, of here's what you should think Christianity. You've come from a background of also, well, I want to be on the side of things which seems converse to Christianity, gaming, anime, pop culture, you know, the world, the debauchery that is Halo Infinite. And now you're at a place where you're like, okay, it's all about just allowing Jesus to love me as I figure things out throughout my lifetime. Now that that's where you're at, what's your perspective on your dad?
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely I've had to learn not to hold a grudge.
Yeah.
Like, and not to be judgmental towards him, because I know, you know, like I said, like I was in that judgmental kind of like mindset and stuff like that. So yeah, and I mean, like, you know, it's still hard to like talk to him sometimes and things like that, but I've learned to like, I guess the big thing is I've learned to be more loving and like to have some more patience, even when sometimes I don't want to. But that's the big thing. It's like, you know, sometimes you just gotta push aside like how you really feel and like be like, all right, like you need to like be more patient. You need to, you know, be more caring, even when you don't want to, because, you know, if we just don't care, then, you know, we're not gonna be caring, we're not gonna be loving, we're not gonna be patient if, you know, like we just have that, oh well, this one time I'm not gonna be like that, you know. It's just how it goes with anything.
Everybody but this person qualifies for my love.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's like, yeah, that's the big thing. It's like we're not supposed to be loving towards certain types of people, we're supposed to be loving towards everyone. Yeah. And we should treat everyone with a mutual kind of like respect and like kind of like, you're a human, so am I. Like,
I mean, think about Paul. You know, if you go by people in the Bible that screwed up and people that you should not trust, because guys, you can love somebody and not trust them. That's a big thing. Yeah. Paul was persecuting Christians. He was throwing Christians to lions. He was having them executed. And then he had to come to Jesus moment where Jesus met him on the road to Damascus and introduced himself, changed his life. And then he decided to serve Jesus with an amazing ministry. And it's like 1 Corinthians 13 at the end says, faith, hope, and love, these three abide, but above all it's love. And a big part of love is being patient, being kind, not being puffed up, you know, long suffering, you know, and not rejoicing in wrongdoings or keeping records. I just think that's so important. But the people that are watching this, Drew, after hearing your story about spiritual abuse and transitioning out of that into a culture of making Jesus real in your life and navigating that, what final nugget do you want to deliver, do you think, that you think they need to hear?
Yeah, well, I think like a really big thing for me is like understanding that it's still not going to be easy. Because, you know, like with COVID happening, for example, like the pandemic, you know, like in my post I mentioned how, you know, I finally felt like I was getting into a good place, and then the pandemic happened, and then I was just like kind of back to square one. And like that's the thing. It's like, you know, it's not gonna always be easy. Like you're always gonna go through trials and stuff like that. But like amongst those trials, like just the really big thing is like not to lose sight. And like the like last year was really tough for me, and I questioned like a lot of things, and I really questioned my faith, and there was times where I felt like turning away from my faith. But I always, like God always like kind of like held me, I guess. Like I never lost like complete sight. And so yeah, like I guess like the really big thing, and I know it's like kind of cliche, is like just not to give up. Like, you may go through rough patches and stuff, and like transitioning out of those kind of spiritual abuse and like trauma experiences into a healthier kind of like lifestyle, like it isn't gonna be easy, and it took me a long while to kind of like get to where I'm at now, and I'm still not like in the perfect situation or whatever. So yeah, that's like definitely like my biggest thing is just like don't give up.
Yeah, and you said something that I want to clarify real quick and just offer my 2 cents on.
Yeah.
You said that you felt that you were back at square one. Guys, I want you to understand. First of all, I love the whole concept of not giving up, because relationships take work. We talked about what's the gospel earlier. What is love actually? Love is a choice. Something you have to choose to do. You have to be very intentional with it, especially when you don't feel it. But as far as going back to square one, when you experience things and you feel like you've been knocked down 3 rungs, you never start over, because you take those experiences with you, and learning how to navigate them through sanctification or navigate them through whatever the opposite of sanctification is. That's the big thing. It's taking it to Jesus and saying, God, I know you love me. I know I'm your son. And I know you're paying close attention to my situation, or at least your word says you are. I don't feel it. I don't believe it. I don't understand it right now. But what am I supposed to see here? And those are the magical moments where you understand God's character at work, And so if you ever feel like you're back to square one, well, if you don't include Jesus, you are. But every single time you include Jesus, when you get knocked down, you never start over. You're always moving forward. And so just have faith in that. And I don't know, I think that's really awesome for me to keep in mind whenever I feel like I'm failing.
Yeah, definitely.
But closing this out, truly, Drew has a podcast.
Yeah.
So what's it called, and what do you guys talk about?
Yeah, so it's called Pop Americana, and it's all about kind of like pop culture. The really big thing that we're focusing on for right now is film, like cinema and everything. So yeah, this month we're going through the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, kind of doing a 20th retrospective, because last year...
You're doing the uncut version, right? Extended?
Kind of, yeah. Like we're
hopefully,
yeah, we're
if
just...
you're a real fan. Kind of like if you're a true Christian. If you're a true fan, Drew.
Yeah, no, yeah. So we're kind of just... Yeah, I mean, we did go through some extended cut stuff in our first episode, but we don't have like a strict, we're only talking about extended cut kind of thing. But yeah, it's just like kind of a 20th anniversary, because it's been 20 years since the trilogy came out. So we're kind of just taking a look back at
just talking about it.
Yeah, just talking about them, kind of like what our experience, like first experience was, kind of like how we did with this podcast, our first experience with Lord of the Rings. How we've like changed our views of the films over the year, and like just the content that are within the films, the themes. So yeah, that's basically what we're doing for right now.
Cool. And if people wanted to get a hold of you for just asking you questions about your testimony or to find your podcast, what social media platforms?
Gosh, well, I have a Twitter, but I can't remember the Twitter handle at the moment.
I'll put it in the description below.
Definitely. And then I'm also friends with Tim on Facebook, so you can definitely find me there.
All right, cool. Well, Drew, thank you so much for being honest about where you've been, and I just love it so much when people are willing to be authentic and get naked in front of the world, because going back to King David, he was a king and he had it all, and he decided to dance naked through the streets because his father loved him, and he was like, you're all I need. I just think it's so cool that you're so willing to Willem Dafoe it.
Yeah.
But anyways, guys, if you've watched this podcast even to a small degree and you've got something good from it, I hope that you'll share it with somebody else who could possibly benefit. If you have somebody that's going through spiritual trauma, just has a history of being in judgmental communities, or if you just know somebody that's been hurt by the church because they've been following religion and not Jesus, share it with them. If you haven't done so already, like and subscribe, because we'd love to get more of these people's voices out there and their stories. I hope it's helped you in some way. I hope that your day is happy, healthy, and we will see you next time. We love you.